air went out.
All right, here we go. So welcome again to Leo's Community Development Center, owned and operated by Regenerating Sonora. All of us in this room know the history of this building, so I'll save that for today. But just the fact is that part of Regenerating Sonora's efforts is to ensure that we provide technical assistance to nonprofits in Superior and in the region of the Copper Corridor. And so that's why we're doing this workshop here. We did one before with Arizona Community Foundation on board governance, and Arizona Community Foundation is going to come back and do another one on fundraising. And so all these are necessary skills, and we want to ensure that we have a good sense of how to do budgeting, because if you've got your budget right, then that's going to make fundraising a whole lot easier for us and for the donors that want to give us the money. You'll be able to tell the story in an effective way with a good budget. There's a lot that goes into good budgeting that we're going to learn about from Jerica Senyak. So we're very happy that you're here. Thank you for being here. Just some background. I know Jerica through her father, Josh Senyak. Josh has been here a couple times. I know him through a mutual friend named Joel Glansberg. And so it's all friend of a friend kind of thing. But Josh has been real instrumental in helping Regenerating Sonora get their budget set up. So he helped us. He's helped Miami Arts Commission get their budget in order, Art 145 get their budget together. And in talking about technical assistance, he said, you know, I could help with some of the budgeting stuff, but you know who would be a lot better at this is my daughter, Jerica. And so that's how we got to talking. So we're very happy that you're here, Jerica. We'd like to, I know we'll get to hear a little bit about your background and where you're coming from. But before we do that, it'd probably be helpful for you to know who's in the room, so that way you can tailor your messaging a little bit to the folks that are here. So, right on. So what we'll do is we'll just go around this way. We'll start with folks that are physically here, and then we'll go to folks on Zoom to introduce yourself. Tell us your name, the organization that you're with, and what got you interested in being here today. Anything else you want to know, Jerica?
And anything else you want me to know? If there's anything else, you just let me know.
Nice. Okay. So you'll have to talk a little bit loud to make it into the microphone here. So if you, I know you're fine projecting because I remember from 5th grade. So all right, go ahead.
My name is Loretta Ellison, and I'm a former retired teacher. My husband just passed away, and we're starting a foundation in his name to give money to students for scholarships. That's
beautiful.
So we're just starting.
Beautiful work. Loretta, I'm so sorry to hear about your husband, but what a beautiful way to memorialize him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, glad you're here. And let's do this right so we can make all your family real proud. Sweet. Yeah, thank you. Beto.
Hello, my name is Robert Beto Cervantes. I'm representing Adelantes Juntos. We just became a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and my reason for being here is trying to access knowledge, hopefully, and become a better partner now in the situations here in Superior.
Great. Congratulations on your 501c3 status. I heard you got that letter today. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're in the ballgame.
That's right. Okay, Maria.
My name's Maria Salcido. I am the current president for the Community Action for Pinal County. I'm also the president for Regenerating Sonora, acting president right now for them. I sit on another nonprofit, which is the Board of Realtors. We serve, that is based out of, even though we take care of Pinal County, we also take care of 26,000 agents in the Valley area as well. So
wow.
The different board pieces. Right now, I'm looking to make some changes within my own career and, working on maybe getting more into the nonprofit piece of it. So I just
Great.
really want to kind of tap into that part.
Great, beautiful.
Right on. Okay, and Melissa, how about you?
Hi, everyone. I just happened to know about this event or this workshop happening like 5 minutes ago. Isn't that so cool? How Chris and I, we were exchanging text messages, and then my Facebook all of a sudden gave me a recommendation to attend this. I'm like,
That's awesome.
well, that's
Whoa.
perfect timing. But so my name is Melissa Dye, and I'm actually the corporate giving lead for Arizona Complete Health. And so we do statewide funding. We are the largest insurance health plan for Medicaid, Medicare, and Marketplace in the state. So I'm just like, I'm so excited to be here and to meet all these wonderful nonprofits that are in the room, and to hear from you as well. Yeah, it's going to be great. Thanks.
Great.
Right on. Well,
Thank you for
glad,
being here,
glad that worked
Melissa.
out, Melissa. That's so cool. Stars are aligned. All right, Lob, how about you?
Hi, my name is Lob. I'm the executive director for the Miami Arts Commission in Miami, Arizona. I've had this position for about, I don't know, 5 or 6 months now, as the position was created due to collaboration we had with Regent Sonora, and I'm the first actual staff member of the Miami Arts Commission.
Woo!
So I'm the first employee, and I'm working now trying to understand what the heck my job is, and this workshop seems like it's pretty much right in line with that sort of thing. So that's kind of why I'm here. I need to. I'm here to be a sponge, and so that's why. Thanks for being here and sharing it with us.
Great.
Right on. Well, Jerica, I'm gonna pin you so you're the main person that's visible on our
Okay.
screen here.
I'll be gigantic.
I know you're gonna be gigantic now.
Larger than
Spotlight
life.
for everyone. Let's see if I can do this right. Okay, I think you are now spotlit.
Great.
So go ahead. Yeah, all
Hey, everybody. It's so great to be here. What an honor and a pleasure. My name is Jerica Senyak, and I am a financial consultant who specializes in supporting nonprofits. My particular area of expertise is actually in arts and culture organizations, but I've worked with all kinds of different nonprofits over time. And a lot of what I do is help folks set up and maintain finance and accounting systems that actually meet their needs, right? Because when you become a nonprofit, it's not like you get handed this nice little manual that's like how to be a nonprofit in a good way. Here's all the tools you need. Here's all the systems you need. Nobody gives you that. And most of the tools that we have for doing things like finance or accounting or all the kind of money stuff are really not designed with nonprofits in mind. They're designed for for-profit organizations. And nonprofits kind of have to make them work as best they can, learn as they go. It's really hard as a young nonprofit or a small nonprofit to get the knowledge and the tools that you need. So a lot of what I do is kind of showing up to do webinars, workshops, all this kind of thing, working with folks who are staff or board of nonprofits and just being like, how can we equip you for success? Knowing what you're up against, knowing that the tools are not set up for your needs, and also knowing that, most people come into this space because they want to do incredible work. And they've got the community connections, they've got the mind for it, but there's an expectation when you run a nonprofit that you're just going to like magically wake up one day and understand how to do nonprofit finance. And nobody's like, you started a nonprofit, here's your free training, right? So, I think it puts a lot of stress and pressure on folks who are running nonprofits to have to suddenly understand all these concepts. So a lot of what I try and do is break them down in a way that I think makes sense for the real world that we live in. So I've got some various stuff to cover today. If at any point I go too fast for you or something's not clear, you just let me know and I'll slow down. We can always go back. I'm going to try and have lots of time for questions. But I do have some slides today for us. And what I really want to talk about today is really what is a budget? When you run a nonprofit, everybody's always talking about the budget. And what does that mean? It means how much money you have to spend, but what is the tool? What does it look like? What is it for? How do we think about it? And fundamentally, how does it help us tell the story of the work we're trying to do and advocate for why we should have the funds we need to do that work. That's really what budgeting is about. So I'm happy to answer any questions about me and my background and what I do, if folks have them. Otherwise, we can dive right into the material.
Go ahead.
Okie dokie. Let me share my screen one moment, please. Okay. Okay, so the first, let's start with a quick little run through of what it is that I'm going to try and cover for you all today. Then the first thing is just the question of what actually is a budget and why should you make one? We're going to talk about the shape of a budget. What is it? What does a construction of a budget look like? What actually do you need to have in your spreadsheet or whatever it is? Once you have the shape, how do you build it out? How do you find out what numbers to put in it? We're going to talk a little bit about in-kind donations. Now, in-kind donations is a concept for budgeting and for nonprofits, which tend to be especially important for small nonprofits that are getting a lot of support that isn't just in cash dollars. It's kind of a higher level concept. If we get to that point and you're like, wow, Jerica, this is not making sense to me, or like, I don't think this is relevant to me, don't worry, just put it in your back pocket for later. And in fact, anything that I'm saying, feel free to just put it in your back pocket. There's no need in any kind of, finance training like this to get everything all at once, to feel like you have an instant and magical grasp of everything. The best case scenario is that you hear these terms and concepts, some of them sink in and make sense. You get to ask the questions that you need to clarify things. And then maybe next time when something like this comes up, the next set of concepts sinks in, right? So don't feel any need to immediately take in all this information. There's a lot of stuff today. The slides will be ready for you. I have some templates for you. The recording will be ready for you, and you can always email me to follow up too. Then we're going to talk about how you can figure out what budget will really work for you, right? So, we're in a world that we can't see the future, and we have to make a budget as if we could see the future. So how do we figure out what's real, what's not real? And finally, I'm just going to go through some extra tips, some resources that I have that might be helpful. And then we'll have some time for questions. Okay, so let's start. What actually is a budget? And I'd love to hear, before I go into what my definition is, do folks out there have a feeling, an idea, a definition for themselves of what a budget is?
Well, a budget is, how you determine your, I guess, what your, it's how you keep track of your spending, and your budget is how you keep track of your spending and keep an evaluation on your spending so that you can project more for the future of what you're going to need as you're expanding and growing.
That's exactly right. That's a great definition, right? It's about how much money do you think you have coming in? How much money do you have going out? But when we talk about it, right, when we talk about what a budget is, it's basically a numerical statement of your plans, your dreams, and the values of your organization, right? It's a form of telling your story. What do you have and what are you going to do? Which is done with numbers, but it is still very much an expression of your intention, the things you care about, right? An organization that's dedicated, like Regenerating Sonora, is not going to be spending a lot of money, for example, on trips to Hawaii for fancy fundraising dinners, right? An organization that is focused, on community building is probably not going to be worrying about, I don't know, doing pollution mitigation in a different state. Right? So what we spend our money on is an expression of our values. A community building organization might spend its money on a space. It's going to spend its money on people. It's going to spend its money on time, right? And so as we build our budget, what we imagine we're doing gets translated into numbers, right? A budget says where you think your money comes from, that's income, and how you intend to spend it. That's your expenses. And this is an important thing. A budget's not a set of hard rules you have to follow, right? A budget is the document where you sit down and you're like, what do I think is going to happen this year or with this project? And you put down your best guess and your intention for that project. And then as the reality takes place and you look at what actually happens, you can set those numbers side by side with your budget and say, okay, we thought it was going to be like this. Actually, it's like this. Let's make some decisions. Let's make some pivots. Maybe everything's going exactly according to plan. Maybe things are not going exactly according to plan, right? But the budget is the plan. A budget is a number of things, right? I think of it as a map. It's a map that takes us from where we are to where we want to be as an organization. You can think of it as a blueprint, right? A statement of kind of what are the foundational expenses and income is also a statement of what are we trying to do. It's a compass. It helps guide you, right? When you aren't sure where to go, your budget can help you make decisions. It's a set of guidelines, right? It's the goal with a budget is to be like, how am I thinking? It doesn't need to be exactly like this, but it helps me keep an orientation. One thing a budget should be is as honest as possible, right? We don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to try and say to the best of our ability what we think is likely. When we fudge a budget, right, or we just kind of pull numbers out of the air and hope for the best, we aren't serving ourselves or our community by doing that, right? Even though a budget is a document that is for the future is unknown, we're trying not to totally make it up. We're trying to get those numbers from somewhere plausible and real, and we're going to talk about how to do that later. A budget's also not set in stone, right? Once you create your budget, maybe there are some big changes and you actually have to do some rebudgeting. That's totally okay. A budget is not always going to net to zero, right? The income that you bring in does not necessarily match the income, the expenses that go out. I think a lot of people hear the term nonprofit and they think, oh, we're not allowed to have any money left over at the end of the year. But that's actually not the case. Your organization is allowed to earn more money than it spends, to bring in more contributions than it pays out. And the reason for that is the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit is when there's money left over at the end of the year, that just goes back into the organization like a rainy day fund, right? So maybe you've been doing good, you've been earning a little bit of extra money each year, you've been spending a little bit less than you bring in. And so after a few years, you have like a nice little pool of funds. And then maybe something happens, maybe you lose a grant, maybe somebody gets sick and you can't bring in as much income anymore. You then have those funds to spend on the organization's needs. For-profit organizations, when they make a profit, they pay out their shareholders. Nonprofits don't do that. When we have profit at the end of the year, it just goes back into the organization to use for the future. That's the only difference. And I want to encourage you, as you're budgeting for your organization, to think about budgeting to make more than you spent, because you want to be building up the resources of your organization. You want to be building up your ability to say, oh, there's a pandemic. Okay, like we're going to be able to weather this, even though maybe some of our decisions have changed. Oh, a funder doesn't want to fund us anymore. That's okay. We've got some money left over, right? Or something else, you might say, you know, we've been doing really good. We actually want to pay for some new staff. We have money to pay for that now, right? So thinking about making sure that you're budgeting for a positive net at the end of the year doesn't need to be big. You know, and some years it's going to be not as positive, some years it'll be negative. That's okay. But in general, I encourage you to think, let's see if we can always bring in a little bit more than we make as often as possible. And finally, your budget's not going to be infallible, right? Because we can't see the future. If we could see the future, we wouldn't need to run a nonprofit. We could be out there making millions, right? So we know that it's not going to exactly match reality, and that's totally okay. It's really just about making our best understanding articulated. We want our budget to be helpful to us, right? Budgeting often can feel like a chore. It's something that funders ask you to do. It's something you're kind of told you have to do. But really, a good budget supports you. It's there to give you information and story that you can rely on. It's an iterative tool, by which I mean that you make a budget, you see what really happens, you look at the difference between what you thought was going to happen and what really happened, and then you make a new budget. And that new budget at the end of the year is going to be a little bit more well-informed than the budget that you made at the beginning of the year, because you have more story to tell. You have more information. Every time you make a new budget year over year or project over project, that budget can be a little bit more well-informed. Still not always going to be exactly correct, and that's fine. Budgets are going to be imperfect. I really want to hammer this one in, right? You don't need to say to yourself, okay, well, if I don't spend exactly $500 in this category, I'm going to get in trouble. It's really useful to compare your budget regularly to your actual activity, right? So you need some system for tracking the money that goes in and out of your organization. That might be accounting software, something like QuickBooks or Quicken or Wave. It could just be a spreadsheet. That's fine. But you want some way to say, okay, here's what really happened. Here's the money that came in and out of my actual bank account for my organization. And then you put that next to your budget and you say, okay, what are the differences? A good budget's full of useful notes, right? You put into your budget where you got those numbers from. If you think that you are going to make a certain amount in ticket sales for an event, or you're going to spend a certain amount on renting a space, it's good to put notes into your budget because our future selves don't remember what we were thinking 3 months ago. So if you just put numbers into your budget and you don't put a note about where those numbers are coming from, future you is not going to remember. And finally, a budget should be shaped to fit your needs. Every organization is different. The expense categories in your budget and the income categories in your budget should be a real reflection of what you're doing. One thing we don't want to do with our budgets, we don't want to constantly change it, right? We want to make a budget and say, this is our best guess, and then see what happens. And if we're wrong and it doesn't turn out that way, that's fine. We're going to put the reality next to the budget and be like, okay, here's the differences. Just because something changes doesn't mean your budget needs to change. Your budget is just that statement of best guesses. A budget also, we don't want it to be obtuse or obscure, right? We want a budget to be clear so that when we look at it or we share it, we understand what it's saying. We should be able to say, this budget, this document makes sense to me. I'm using it to advocate for my needs. If you look at a budget and your eyes glaze over, that's not a good tool for you. A good tool for you is one that you can look at and say, yeah, I get this. And so that's a really important gut check to have. It's something really important to pay attention to. Anytime you're looking at financial documents, if what happens to you in your head or your body is a feeling of like, oh no, I really don't understand this, that means it's not working well for you. It doesn't mean that you're wrong or that you're stupid. It means that the tool isn't serving your needs and you get to advocate for that tool. Finally, we don't want to fudge the budget to make it work, right? If we put in everything in our budget and it turns out that we have way more in expenses than we have in income, we don't want to just make up that income as if it was going to happen when it won't. We have to take a hard look and be like, okay, what's really going on? What choices and decisions do we need to make, knowing that maybe things aren't going to go the way that we want, right? So sometimes when you're applying for grants, funders are going to ask you to make the income and the expenses exactly match and exactly net out to zero. And you're going to be like, that's not real. And you're going to be asked to kind of make that up. And that's a problem that we have as organizations, because sometimes funders ask us basically to make up numbers, and that's not fair, but it's a pattern, right? A funder ideally is going to ask you for the real picture, and that budget might not be exactly 0-0, right? Your income might not exactly match your expense, but we're going to try really hard to say just what's real and not put in any numbers just to make the numbers work. Any questions before I go on any further about anything I've said so far? No. Okay, good. So talking about what a budget is for. A good budget is a tool to help you. It's a map, right? To take you from where you are right now to the place that you want to end up. I use the acronym CALM when I'm thinking about budgeting. A budget should help you feel calm in yourself, clear in yourself. And here's what I make those letters stand for. C is for clarify. A good budget helps you understand the actual costs of your organization or project and see how much support you really need, right? When you're sitting around thinking about all the amazing stuff that you want to do, it's easy to be like, oh, well, we can probably do that for cheap, or like, oh man, that's going to cost a lot of money. When you put the budget together and you actually walk through all the pieces of that puzzle, you have a much better understanding of what's actually going on. Maybe the thing that you thought was going to be really expensive actually isn't that bad. Maybe the thing you thought was going to be cheap, once you actually think through all the pieces, you're like, oh, that's going to cost more than I thought, right? So a budget helps us clarify what's really going to happen. A for advocate. A good budget lets you show other people that you've thought through your project. You've really sat down and you've listed out, here's all the stuff I want to do, and here's what is actually going to need to happen, right? Here's the money I need to spend. And when you think through all of that, it makes it much easier for you to advocate for your work and be like, look, I really thought about this. Like, all I need is this. Why don't you give me some money and we can make this amazing thing happen, right? It helps other people feel like what you're talking about isn't just pie in the sky. It's not just grand dreams. It's really tangible and real. When you put it in a budget, those numbers say, well, I put thought into this and I know what I need. And when people see that you know what you need, very often they're excited to help. Whereas if you're like, well, I think maybe I need this, I think maybe I need that, people might be more like, okay, well, come back to me when you have a better idea. L for limit. A good budget gives you what I think of as a set of lines to work within, right? So you can make your ideas and your goals the right size, right? Maybe your best case scenario, you get all the grants you apply for, you get all the support you need. Maybe your budget is $50,000. Maybe if things don't go the way that you wanted them to, you don't get all the grants and help that you want, it's only $5,000. Now you know your budget's going to be somewhere between 50 and 5. That's what you're working within. That's a really different set of ideas than being like, well, if everything goes really great for me, my budget's going to be $200,000. And if everything doesn't go well, it's going to be $5,000. That's a really different shape, right? So having our budget helps us really understand, well, how big am I? How much capacity do I need? And finally, M for make choices. A good budget helps you identify what's essential to your organization so that if things don't go exactly as well as you want them to go, your budget can help you say, okay, well, this is what matters to me the most. This is where I'm going to put the money. You know, I had all this stuff in my budget, which like was a best case scenario. Maybe it would have been great to have that. But when I look at my budget and I see what I really need, these are the choices I'm going to make. So let's talk about what a budget actually looks like. How many folks here have seen budgets where they're like, okay, I looked at this budget and this budget kind of made sense to me? And how many folks here have actually never really looked at a budget? And I can't see everybody in the room because my screen is really small. So if folks just want to say out loud.
Seen them.
Seen them. I see some hands.
Yeah, I've seen budgets.
Have you seen budgets that make sense to you? Have you seen budgets where you looked at them and you're like, oh yeah, I can follow this?
Sort of.
Sort of.
Sort of. I mean, my budget, I keep my budget monthly, you know, and it hardly ever makes sense until I look at it afterwards. And as my personal budget, but the budget for our organization, I've been involved with a couple of grant writing processes and creating a budget. So it sort of makes sense, but I'm still learning.
Great. Great. And is there anybody here who either hasn't really looked at a budget before or has only seen budgets that like don't really make sense to them? Everybody here has taken a look at a budget that makes sense. Great. Love to hear it. So the general shape of a nonprofit budget is kind of the same whether you're a small project or a big company, right? What changes is the level of detail in your budget. Oops. What we like to structure first up top is usually the earned revenue for the organization, right? So budget is income on top, expenses at the bottom, and then the net leftover, right? So earned revenue is stuff that people pay you for, right? There's what we call an exchange transaction, goods or services for money, right? Ticket sales, merchandise or concession sales, workshop, teaching fees, performance fees, you know, anything where people are paying you money to get something. That's earned revenue. Contributed revenue is the money people give you because they just want to support you, no strings attached, right? So those are usually split out by type into corporation, foundation, government, and individual. Depending on your structure, you might also split it out a little further. You might say board donations, you might show in-kind donations, right? So that's what we have up top. One section for earned and one section for contributed. It's really helpful right from the beginning when you're building your budget to keep these sections separate. And the reason for that is when you file your IRS Form 990, which is the federal filing form for nonprofit organizations, the IRS actually asks for those things separately. And in general, when you're applying for grants, funders usually also ask to see those things separately because they are really kind of a different way of thinking about income, right? Your earned income is usually generated from your program in some way, right? It has to do with money that your actual nonprofit program generates, whereas contributed revenue is really about advocating for your work and just inviting people to support you. On the expense side, the first thing that we like to put in our budget is personnel, right? That is people that you pay for your labor. If you're a small organization, you might not have employees, you might just have contractors, but personnel includes both employees and contractors, right? That is people who get paid for their time. Admin expenses. This is a really important thing to put in your budget. These are the costs of doing business, right? An office, internet, telephone, insurance. The larger your organization, the higher these costs are going to be. It's tempting to under budget these costs because very often they don't feel like they're real. You're sort of like, oh, well, I'll pay for the internet or whatever it might be, right? It's really important to put them in your budget though, because they're part of the true cost of your organization thriving and surviving. So if you leave those costs out, what you're doing is not telling yourself the whole story of all the help that you need. Finally, your program expenses. So this is going to be direct expenses that are not related to personnel, but are incurred by your programs, right? Production equipment, venue or space rental for your events. It might be food for gatherings. It might be travel to and from, right? Gas to take participants to and from a program. It might be gardening supplies. Whatever your programs are, your program expenses are those direct costs that are incurred. And what I'd like to do right now is actually show you a budget template that I like to use for a lot of organizations. Okay, this is a really simple budget template that can be kind of customized for your needs. It's got 3 tabs, and I'm going to send this to everybody after. I'm going to send this to Chris to pass on to everybody after the workshop. You can use this as a budget template for your organization if you want. It has 3 tabs in it, and what we're going to look at first is what I call the scenario budget template. I like to talk about, when I'm doing budgeting, I like to talk about the 3 bears. Everybody remember the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears? She goes into the house. One porridge is too hot, one porridge is too cold. Finally, there's the porridge that's just right. I like to think about budgets this way too. Instead of just making one budget, it's really helpful to make yourself a too hot budget and a too cold budget. And then from those two, make yourself a just right budget. The too hot budget is the one where it's like, oh man, I'm on fire. Everything's going great. I got all this money. All the grants I applied for worked. Everybody came out to see my shows, whatever it is. I've got all the money that I'm hoping to get. And also now that I can see what all that income is, I'm going to put in all the things I want to spend that money on to make my program shine. Your too cold budget is the exact opposite of that, right? When you're in your too cold budget, nothing goes the way you hoped. You didn't get that grant. Nobody shows up. Your insurance costs twice what you think it's going to cost, right? So it's really thinking about what's my best case scenario? What's my worst case scenario? And reality is probably going to fall somewhere between those 2 poles. And so when you look at your best case and your worst case, it's a lot easier to say to yourself, what seems most likely to me? And so you can see here, it's all broken out. You've got your earned income sections, your contributed income sections, right? There's some just kind of what I call boilerplate expense categories here, right? You might not have all of these things in your organization. You might also have expense categories that I haven't listed here that you want to add to your budget. But this gives you an idea of the ways that people break things down, right? So for example, your admin contractors might be your executive director if you don't have employees, right? Your grant writer, legal fees Program contractors might be people, right? That's anybody that you're paying to help with your program. If you have an education program, that might be teachers. If you have a community garden, maybe it's gardeners, right? If you have, a workforce support program, that might be legal fees for folks who are helping out, right? So breaking it down this way gives you a way to think through what actually are the things my organization needs to thrive. What am I spending my money on in order to do the work I want to do? And what I encourage you to do when you're making your budget is really tell the story. What am I trying to do this year? What are the programs I'm trying to run? And then as you think about that, be like, what are each of the people I have to pay or the costs I have to pay to make that program happen? Marketing expenses. This is an easy one to overlook, right? But very often nonprofits need to be able to say, hey, we're out here. Come to our stuff. Know that we're here. Join our programs, right? Give us money. So marketing expenses are real. That might be that you're paying somebody to design a flyer for you or a sign, right? It might be that you're printing out handouts. It might be that you have to pay for a website or somebody to help you design a website. Admin expenses, maybe you have food. Every time there's a board meeting, you make sure to feed everybody. Insurance is a really big one. Your rent, if you have something like an office, might be in there, right? Travel, just to get from a meeting. All those things are admin expenses. And then we have our program expenses, right? So that might be food for an event. That could be sending out flyers, telling folks information. That could be supplies that you need to purchase, right? Travel, whatever it is. And so this is just a simple budget template that gives you an overview of the kind of things that you're going to get asked for again and again and again as a nonprofit as you apply for funding. And I developed this template based on kind of having to more or less build the same thing for many, many different nonprofits. It's generic. It can be tailored to your needs, but this gives you a general sense. So what I'm curious now is how much this looks to folks like the budgets they've seen before.
It has.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So let's talk about constructing a budget. Who here has actually built a budget before? Anybody? I see Chris waving. I see a no from Lob.
Yeah, I've only really been involved, but I haven't really built one.
Great. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about what you experienced when you were building your budget?
Well, a big part of it was like modeling out, like getting real granular on certain activities.
Mhm.
So, okay, we need to budget for our garden stuff that we're doing.
Yep.
So then we had to say, okay, well, what are all the things we're doing related to garden stuff? List all that out. And then it's like, okay, now we've listed that stuff out. Now go even deeper. So, okay, one of the things we do at the garden is we have garden parties. Okay.
Yep.
Well, then, what stuff happens at the garden party that we need to spend money on?
Totally.
And ends up being like a little bit of a guess with like a little bit of, well, you never know what else we might need
Right.
for to kind of construct sort of a bottoms up approach. So
Mhm.
okay, well, we know that for a garden party, we've got the $20 to $40 in food that we're spending. We've got like $20 to $40 in like materials. Maybe that's like some of the plants or the whatever. Basically, you get all that stuff added up, and then how many garden parties are we gonna have in a year? 12. Okay. Well,
Right.
now I have one part of the garden part of the, so it's like basically it's a little tedious, but it is helpful to like really think through in detail how it's gone in the past and how we want it to go. Like now we're seeing the value as a, for instance, in having some paid entertainment come to the garden. We had a
Right.
guy come as a volunteer a couple times with his guitar, and he just played music while we were all there sitting around the campfire during the garden party. So we're thinking, okay, well, what can we do now to try to have a little bit of funds to pay the guy, because
Right.
people to continue to do that. And then we're thinking next year we got to add on to our bottoms up approach entertainment garden stuff.
Right. Right. Chris, what you walked us through is such a great example of what I call budgeting by program. So the third tab on this budget template is what's called a program budget. So now these columns, instead of being for different scenarios, or for different programs. So we can actually go through, right? And let's say the first program is the garden program, right? We can go through and do exactly what Chris just walked us through, right? So, okay, let's see. We want to pay somebody for playing music at the garden. So that's an event stipend. Chris, how much do you want to pay the musician next year?
$30.
$30. Okay, great. So we're going to say, great. And then I'm going to put a note. You remember I mentioned the importance of putting notes, right? This is because I might not remember who I was talking about next time. So I could name this. It doesn't have to be called event stipends. I can say musicians or entertainment, right? I can call the categories whatever I want. But I'm going to put a note in here and say $30 for musician for garden party. And oh, wait, we have 12 garden parties a year. Is that right, Chris?
Yep.
Okay, so we're actually going to multiply that 30 by 12, because that's how many times we're going to pay the guy $30 12 times. So now our budget for the year for the garden party is 360, right? $30 for musician for garden party, 12 parties. Okay, you mentioned some other things, Chris. You mentioned, oh, we're going to pay for food. You said it's what, 20 to 40 bucks for food?
Yeah.
Great. So let's say an average of 30 again, right? So that's $30 times 12, about 30 per party. You mentioned supplies. What kind of supplies are we going to need?
A lot of times it's like some plants, because we don't have our nursery set up yet. So we're buying plants, and that's about $25.
Great. So 25 per party for plants,
Yes.
right? Okay. What else might you have for supplies?
That's pretty much it for supplies.
Great.
We have like we do some marketing, so we're paying a marketing coordinator. So I'll get into the weeds with that one, because like they're usually doing like a whole bunch of flyers for us, not just the one. But if we needed to align it specifically for this, then it's probably like we'll just call it $20 in marketing expense per party.
Great. So let's call that 20 in graphic design, right? For people making flyers for you. Okay. Great. What else might you have?
That's pretty much it.
Great. Okay, that's pretty much it. So now you have a budget for your garden party, which is the garden party costs about $1,200, about $1,300, right, per year, which means if you want to fund this, now you know how much you need to raise to make the garden party pay for itself, right? Yeah. You could ask a corporation, for example, you could say, hey, would you be willing to sponsor the garden party? And if they do, maybe you can say, hey, could you give us $1,500 for the garden party? And maybe that extra money for the garden party can go to things like your time, right? Because Chris, one of the things you haven't put in here is like, wait a second, it took your time to organize this.
Yeah, and we have one to two staff members there supporting, like a contractor and a staff member.
Great,
you know.
Great. So we also want to talk about their time. You know, if they spend a few hours, they're getting paid for that time, hopefully.
Yep.
You know, and so we can put them in as well, right? Yep. So this is what we're talking about. Like, this is what it's like. And maybe what you end up getting, maybe somebody gives you $2,000 instead of $1,500 for the garden party. Now, what you can do is you can say, okay, well, what we'd like to do is actually buy some more plants, right? So a way that you could do that is if you put your best case scenario in, you put in $2,000 for your best case scenario, just $1,000 for your worst case scenario, and say, okay, in one of these, we end up with extra money. In one of these, we're kind of out of pocket. What would we want to spend that extra money on? Do we want to buy more supplies? Do we want to pay more people? Or actually, do we want to keep that money for a different program?
There's the value conversation. What are we valuing? Like right away.
That's what you exactly.
We're thinking we'd like to pay our musicians like more money than $30 if we could, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep, Chris, you put your finger exactly on it. Doing the best case scenario is a really good chance to talk about values. And so going back to our slideshow, talking about constructing your budget, it can be really daunting to think about a budget because you're like, well, I don't have any money. How am I supposed to do this? I don't have any money yet. But what's important is saying what you want to do, because then you know how much money to ask for. So when you're constructing your budget, start by just taking yourself through the story. I mean, like, what do you need cash-wise to make it happen, right? That's what we just did with Chris's garden party budget. Now we know if Chris wants to make the garden party happen 12 times a year, now he knows how much he needs, right? That's the bare minimum to make it work, right? That's our starting point, not the ending point. So when we're building a budget, the first thing we ask ourselves is, what is the thing you're trying to make happen? What are your mission or your major goals? You can do it for the whole year, or you can do it for a particular project, right? It depends on whether you're trying to ask for money for your operations for a year, or whether you're asking for money for a specific project. Then we ask ourselves, okay, so now we know what it is we're trying to budget for, right? We're trying to budget for the garden party. From there, we have to say, okay, what do we have to pay for to make it happen? If there's no plants, there's no garden, right? If nobody knows that the garden party is happening, there's no garden party, right? So we go through the things in our mind that have to get paid for. These are our necessary expense categories, right? These are the things without which it just doesn't work. Then we think, what's the smallest amount we can realistically spend and still feel that we succeeded, right? So Chris tried this out. Chris was like, we didn't pay a guy anything. And that didn't work so good. So this time we're going to spend a little bit of money, right? This is what we call the minimum budget. So what we just went through with Chris, that $1,260, that's Chris's minimum budget for the garden party. Now we want to ask ourselves, okay, but what would we like to do? And this is what we call the ideal budget. This is where we start doing the storytelling and the dreaming and the advocacy, right? We want to make sure we put in the hidden costs, right? What about Chris's time? What about the staff time? Hey, in order to make flyers, there's a lot of emails flying around. What about the internet connection, right? These are admin costs that we want to put in the budget. Be like, hey, it's not just about the direct expenses. There's some indirect costs too. People have to, this costs more than we think when we actually look at the time that we're spending. We want to ask for money for that. But finally, we ask ourselves, what are all the realistic sources of cash support? Who in the community has deep pockets? What funders are available? Are there things that we can sell that people want to buy, right? And that is our revenue. And when we're done putting all that together, we have a budget, right? Finally, one thing we might want to ask ourselves is, what are the non-cash resources and support we have available? Maybe the local nursery, right, is like, well, you have a nonprofit? Great. We'll actually donate $300 worth of plants to you. That's not cash you're getting, but it is now money you don't have to spend on plants. That's really valuable. Those are what we call in-kind donations, right? We want to put that into our budget because it shows the real size of the organization. So I want to just stop here for a second, and I'm going to unspotlight myself so we can feel a little more conversational. And I want to talk to folks here and get a second to talk about, like, what are some places where you feel like, there's some things I would like to spend money on if I felt like we had the funds, but I'm not sure we do.
More staff.
More staff. More staff.
Are this material gonna be available to us?
Yes. Yes, I will send all of this to you.
Yeah, I would say more staff, office space.
Office space, great.
Mine's, I think, a little bit different, because, ours are more established, nonprofits.
Mhm.
Well, some of them are on this end, but, more of like for different benefits for people,
Mhm.
a little bit more of that.
Mhm.
Especially with today's market.
Mhm. 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 right? And so putting into your budget, right, using that kind of like best case scenario, worst case, too hot, too cold budget, you can say, here's what we have right now. Here's what we're doing right now. And then you have to make a budget that's like, and if we had more money, this is what we would pay people. Right? These are the benefits we would give. This is what we would do if we had more money. It's really important to say what you can do on the shoestring, right? What's the least money that you need just to function? That's great to start there. And then we want to start dreaming. Because when we start dreaming, we can say, well, we want to ask you for your help with this. If you don't get that money, you still have your too cold budget, right? You still have your shoestring budget to fall back on. You know, okay, well, as long as we get like this little bit, we're going to be okay. But it lets you think big. It lets you say, this is what we want to do, right? And that's really important for us when we're doing budget work. I'm going to skip the slide about in-kind donations because they're kind of complicated. And I think that's kind of a thing that if anybody has questions about that later on, we can come back to it. So one of the things that we ask ourselves a lot when we're doing budgeting is basically, how do we find the thing that feels true? When we don't know what's going to happen, we don't know what's real, right? And so what we talk about here is finding a scenario that works best for us. As Chris said, what we want to do is test out different possibility models. What we're looking for is something that feels plausible and doable, right? It's not completely imaginary, but it's also not just only purely the known things. When we know what our minimum budget looks like, that's when it's time to give ourselves permission to create a larger budget than the minimum, right? Well, that's what we really want to do. We want to plan for the best as well as for the worst, right? We want to really think through, if we could do it anyway, what would that look like? What would I pay for? Who would get paid, right? And then when you've done that, list out all the income you feel really confident about getting this year, right? Maybe you've already been promised a certain amount of income from a funder. Maybe you know from last year kind of what you brought in. You're like, I know we can hit that goal again. And then what you can do is you can look at the gap between the income that you're sure about and the way you really want to do things. How big is that gap? Maybe it's really big. Maybe it's not that big. And you can do a couple of things, right? Once you know how big that gap is, you can start brainstorming. Could I find ways to bring in more money? Are there more people I could ask? Are there more creative ways that I could fundraise? Can I reach out? Can I use my networks and community to actually bring more money in, to increase that revenue so that I can cover more of my dream budget? You can look at that dream budget and say, okay, well, maybe I don't need all of these things. Which of these in my dream budget could I reduce and still get that good feeling, right? Those two things together will let you work out a compromise that feels like, hey, maybe I can do this. What's really important and what I want to emphasize is to actually just try playing around with the numbers rather than thinking, oh, I got to make a budget and that when I've made that budget, it's done and it's got to be right. Try a few different budgets. Be like, well, what if I put it in this way? Okay, that didn't work out so good. What if I put it in that way? That number feels better. The story feels better. I like what's happening here. I can advocate for this. I can ask for this, right? So I really encourage you when you're doing budgeting to try different stuff before you settle on a budget where you think, okay, this budget feels good to me. What's really important is to find this weird balance between being very imaginative and dreamy about your organization, really thinking about like, what is it that we can envision ourselves doing? How do we want to do our work? How do we ask for that? And also being honest and realistic about like, okay, well, maybe not this year, right? That balance is what makes a great budget. And this is most of the slides, right? I just have a few extra tips here. The first one is my friend Min has this, she's a Buto dancer in Berlin, and she has this beautiful idea. She calls it wishing out loud. When you wish out loud, you hear yourself say what you want. Very often when we're working in the nonprofit space, we feel scarcity, right? We really feel like there's not enough. We don't have enough. We are doing everything for too little all the time. And it can be really scary to actually say what we want because there's a feeling of like, we're never going to get that. So it's really important to wish out loud for what you want so that you hear yourself say it. You hear yourself say, this is the thing we're trying to do. This is what we're going for. We're building for this. We're building towards this, right? Because if you don't say it, if you don't let yourself do that wishing out loud with your budget, you're always going to keep it really, 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 really little. And you're never going to give yourself a chance to see, can we actually grow more into this? If we ask for it, maybe actually we will get what we need. In general, when you're budgeting, it's good to end up with a budget that's conservative for income and generous for expense. And by that, what I mean is being cautious about how much income you put in, right? Not being really wildly like wishful thinking about your income, but being careful. But then making sure that for expense, you give yourself a little bit of wiggle room for things to cost more than you think they're going to. When you do that, you're going to end up not disappointing yourself because you didn't get all that money or because you had to spend more. In general, it's really nice to be pleasantly surprised by your success than set goals that you can't reach. Again, just one more time, it's really important to be honest, right? If you fudge the numbers, if you make stuff up too much, right? Just kind of be like, well, maybe it'll happen this way, or like, it'd be nice if it did, then you can't really advocate for your true needs, right? You're setting yourself up for disappointment. If you don't know how much something's going to cost, which is a thing that really happens, best guess, right? Back when I was in 5th grade, they told us to do our best guess. We've got a 5th grade teacher here. So, that's really back to that best guess idea, right? Research it as best you can, put in what seems likely. Again, if you can have budget notes, it's really helpful, right? Putting those notes in that say, where did you get this number? What do you think that is? It's really helpful for you. And it's also down the line, it's going to be really helpful for funders to understand what it is that those numbers come from. Now, here's a good one. Building in a buffer for contingencies, right? Things go crazy, things go awry. We don't know how things are going to work out. You can always put in basically a kind of padding line, right? Just somewhere in like your other program expenses. You can just put in 3 to 5% of your overall budget as a kind of just in case line into your expenses, right? If you build in a little bit of, I don't know what it's going to be, but it might cost me money, then you have more built into your budget if something else, something very specific costs more than you think it's going to. This is really important too. If you're applying for grants from a funder and there's something in the template or the guidelines that you don't understand or that's not clear to you, I really encourage you to ask the funder. I think there are some people when they're applying for grants who are like, oh, if I ask a question, the funder is going to think that I don't understand. But it's really the opposite. Funders love it when you ask for clarification because they want to give you the money. They want you to do a good job. And they really appreciate you asking for that clarity. So don't ever be afraid if something's not clear to you to ask the funder for more clarification about what it is they want. And finally, just remember that reality and the budget never match, right? A budget is just your goal to help you navigate the road. It's a really solid tool to help you talk about the thing that matters to you most, which is your work. And that's my whole slideshow for the day. And we've got half an hour just to talk and ask questions, right? Really be specific about your needs, the things that you experience, where to begin, anything that you have that comes up around the idea of budgeting, please, let's talk.
Yeah, I can start by saying a few things. One is that I found one useful tool of just looking up the budget and seeing what programs we have and where the gaps are has led to some creative thinking. Like we were doing a business mixer here and we had budget for the mixer, but then we invited some partners to come and participate as well. And I was just in the middle of the conversation with the partners. I said, hey, well, can anyone here cover the food and the drinks for the party? And well, how much do you not have budgeted for? I said, no, we have it all budgeted for, but if you can help us with this, then we can use this money for other things.
That's right.
Well, actually, we can't cover food and we can't cover drinks. It's against our policies. And said, okay, but it's a pretty normal thing for partners to come in and support events like this. And the point I'm trying to make in this part of the conversation is like advocating for ourselves, not just being like, oh, well, we actually have the budget, so never mind, why did I ask?
Right.
Or they said, oh, we can't cover that. I didn't say, okay, never mind then. I said, well, actually, like, maybe there is a way. And then
Yep.
one of the partners was awesome, and he just like thought outside the box and said, well, if we are allowed to bring a table there, then you could charge us a tabling fee.
Mhm.
And then we'll be able to, we can charge us $100 or whatever it is, then
Mhm.
go to the event and we already have budget ourselves for tabling fees.
Right.
So it's just interesting to see like how, like our budgets can talk to each other with other people that we're working with,
That's
figure
right.
out where it fits in, so that way they need to spend that money and we could use that money and put it to work. So
That's right.
one aside, I have a couple others, but yeah.
Well, recently, just a couple days ago, Cara teamed up with the Elks. And
Mhm.
we had 35, 40 people going in for a training or talking about other nonprofit things that are going on in Pinal County. And the Elks paid for the boxes, the food boxes, and it was a time to, they just talking and really coming together and discussing what programs are out there and what's happening. And at that time, the Elks, who really doesn't really do anything with what we were talking about, but what became a partner of Cara,
Mhm. Mhm.
really
Mhm.
brought themselves to the play of, this is what we're gonna do to help you.
Exactly. Mhm.
So,
But both of those are great examples.
so we do that a lot.
Yep. And both of those are great examples because they talk about like, when you're thinking about what you're trying to do and you're like, okay, we need this, we want to do these events. We need a space. We need food for these events. You put those into your budget, then you can ask people to cover them. If you're not thinking about that as those real costs, then maybe you're not thinking about asking people to pay for those costs. Another thing, Chris, that you can do in that situation is be like, right, the funders kind of being like, oh, well, we don't pay for food. You can be like, what about our staff time? What about the staff time for covering this event, right? Look at all the staff we have here. Like this, they're spending their days and hours here. Do you support staff, right? So there are other ways, especially when you start thinking about what are all the things you're really spending. It might not be spending cash money, but what do you have to do? And then you can ask people, right, for that support.
Yeah.
Yes. I know that.
And I got a nice message from Melissa here. Yeah. Great to meet you, Melissa. Thanks for joining.
Well, this whole meeting has been super informative for me. I've been really just, like I said, being a sponge. I'm kind of really new to this whole project. I got someone coming in the gallery. I gotta work, sorry. I'll be back.
See you in a minute, Lob.
I can give you all, so I gave, that was a positive story. I'll give you a less than positive story, which is that we didn't put together both the too hot, too cold, just right budget. We put more of like a just a little better than too cold budget.
Uh-huh.
And that's what we had as our main budget. And then there was this major donor in the state of Arizona that said, hey, we want to support you guys. And we said, awesome. And then towards the end of the engagement, they said, oh, will you send over the budget? First of all, I think looking back on it, what I would probably do is say, great, let's set up a time so I can walk you through it. Because yes, the budget tells a story, but when you have the cliff notes in your own voice to be able to explain and walk someone
That's right.
it's way better than just here it is, and then they're left to kind of figure it out on their own, whether you have notes or not. They're not gonna
Yep,
get
that's right.
So I just sent it over, and they replied back to like, well, you have these really ambitious goals, but this budget doesn't really seem like it's reflective of all these ambitious
Right.
goals. And then I had to be like, well, actually, here's what we'd really like to do. And then I gave them the a version of the too hot budget. Here's what we really want to do. And so what they came back with is, okay, we're gonna give you some funding. But knowing what they could have given us and what they decided to give us, it left a lot on the table as a result of that. And it was right at the, I mean, they loved everything, and it was just right at that end. They just needed to, if they would have seen a too hot version of the budget, or if we were able to even if I gave them the normal budget that we had to talk them through it, I think they'd be able to understand more what was going on, and then we would have had a different result. So doing this the right way, and the way that Jerica is recommending, it really has a material impact on how much money we're going to be able to raise as nonprofits.
Mhm.
I think that's such a great point about what the kind of too hot, too cold thing can do, Chris, because when we make our budget and it's just the bare minimum all the time, what we're basically saying is like, oh, well, I guess we don't need that much.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we can get by with only a little. And the truth is, of course, we can't, right? I've never known anybody like nonprofits for making the Taj Mahal out of 2 popsicle sticks and a piece of tape. Nonprofits do incredible work with no money to do it. It's really amazing. It's really incredible to see. But also, you shouldn't have to do that, right? You shouldn't have to build the Taj Mahal out of popsicle sticks, right? You should get money to build the Taj Mahal if that's what you want to do. And so having different versions of your budget allows you to say, if we had this money, this is what we do. And then you can think through it in advance, right? That's the really important thing. If you have the funds and you can say, this is what we want to do if we have these funds, then when somebody's like, well, I'm ready to give you some money, you already have the story of what you're going to do with it. But if somebody shows up who's ready to give you some money and your budget says basically like, we expect to not have any money, you don't have a story of how you're going to make good use of the money they're going to give you. What you want is to have ready a story that says, oh, you want to give us some money? Let me tell you the amazing things that we're going to do. And I've got the numbers. I already thought through how I want to do this. All we need is the check from you. Yep. That's why it's so powerful to do multiple budgets, right? To try a few different things. And then that way too, if something falls through and you don't get that money, you're like, well, I've got my too cold budget. I've got my shoestring budget. I know I can still make it work. So it's really validating both ways, right? It's really validating if you are in the position of thinking you don't have anything, and then somebody gives you some money and you're like, boy, am I ready? And it's really validating too if you're like, well, somebody pulled the plug on a big project. Now we can't do it the way that we wanted, but we still know we can do it.
I think the too cold budget is really important too, because it talks about what's necessary to pull off the objectives.
That's right. Right.
Because we've tried some other ways in the past of like saying, okay, what line items are we going to prioritize to make sure that when we get money, these things come in, we'll apply it to these things. And then after we get that money, then we can apply it. But if we just make it simple and say, okay, here's our too cold budget. After that's covered, then we can start looking at how to allocate funds to the better case scenarios. And that's going to be important, because if you think about like a year-long planning, you want to have the money there for your utilities to keep the lights on.
That's right.
And you and whatever else those funds are. So to have them there, know you're not going to spend them on the nice to have thing to do, because we need this money to be here to pay the utility bills.
I want to put a note too, because we've got 2 new nonprofits, right? In the room with us. The first time you do a budget, you are just kind of making it up to a certain extent. You're gonna put your budget together and you can be like, well, let's hope this works. The important thing to think about with budgeting is that it's not just that you make one budget and that's it forever, right? You make a budget, you see how things go, and the next year, when you make your budget again, you have more information, right? You grow with your budget. Your budget grows with you. The knowledge and experience that you have year over year as you work on your programs and projects will grow. And it's totally good to not worry too much about it the first time, because the first time when you're just starting out, you just don't exactly know what's going to happen yet, right? Like your project's a baby still. So it's great to just try something. And if all that happens is you make a budget and at the end of the year, you're like, wow, that is not at all what my budget said was going to happen. great, you've got really valuable information because you can look and you can say, well, I thought it was going to be like this, I guess. And you can say, oh, here's the places that it was actually the way that I thought. Great, I'll carry that over into my new budget. Here's the places where reality was wildly different and I didn't think it through in the way that worked. Now I know what I need to do differently. That's really what budgeting is for, is to kind of get you used to making those projections and thinking through the plan for your organization. And every time you make a plan, you know, man plans and God laughs, they say, right? Like you don't know what's going to happen. But if you don't make the plan, you can't really keep track of what kind of expectations you had. And that makes it really hard to make plans in future.
It works out even for like committees that are within the nonprofit.
Mhm.
Because like, for instance, on one of my nonprofit pieces, we have a committee of 4. And those 4 are looking at doing, let's say, community gardens, right? In areas within the county. And we had to put together our own budget of what money was going to be needed from the organization. And then we had to also partner with other nonprofits in order to make sure that we had enough resources with the budget that we have. So we do quite a bit of that as well. So it's all about, you know, all of this is about where we're at with it financially and then our time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. A budget is what resources do you have? What resources do you wish you had?
How about the
And
new one?
finding, yeah. Sorry, what's that, Chris?
Y'all got any questions you want to ask?
No, I'm very informative because I learned what to put in the budget, because, you know, that's one of the first steps to do. And so I like that spreadsheet to see, you know, where to go from there, yeah. So, yes.
Great.
Well, that just gives me a guideline as to where I think we want to go and how to get there.
Great.
Very good information for me to share with my partners. And I'm hoping to get some of that information, like you said, it's gonna be available to us. Yeah. You know, okay.
Great. Yeah, that's really it. Like how do you know what to put in it? And just tell that story of what it is you're trying to do. And then think through, okay, if I want to do that, what do I have to spend money on? If I have to spend that money, how do I get money to cover that? Right? Those are the questions that we're asking when we're budgeting. And what really helps is just saying to ourselves again and again, what am I trying to do? And what would it cost me to do it? What would it cost me to do it at the bare minimum? What would it cost me to do it in the way I really want? I'll ask for the money to do it in the way that I really, really want. And probably I can make it work no matter what.
Jerica, tell us about the services that you provide to nonprofits.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I do a lot, basically, you know, kind of deep dive consulting like this. So I help organizations set up systems for tracking their financials, right? So now you've got your nonprofit, you need to actually keep track of the money going in and out so that you can see what you're spending and earning. I help folks set that up. I help folks create their budgets. Right. So if you're doing this kind of work and you're like, okay, I'm ready to make my budget, and you're not totally sure what kind of categories to have in your budget or where to budget your expenses, I'll sit down with folks and I help them with that. And then I also do things like sitting down with folks and walking through the different financial reports that you get asked for, right? So you're going to hear the terms profit and loss and balance sheet and 990 again and again as you go through your nonprofit. What are those? What are those? Where do they come from? How do you interpret them and make sense of them and use them and share them? So for me, it's really about financially empowering nonprofits, knowing that, you know, again, as I said at the beginning, nobody hands you the tools that you need. So really trying to help folks. I used to talk about financial literacy, but I don't really like that term because I think that folks do such incredible work with the money that they have. I feel like most nonprofits are literate in finance. You know, they know what they're doing, they're trying. It's just they don't have the tools. So now I talk about financial empowerment. What do you need to feel like you are powerful with your money and you can advocate for what you need?
How do you feel about needs assessments?
It's a good question. I do that for financial tools, right? So I very often go into organizations and I say, okay, what kind of activities are you doing? What are your operations? What kind of systems are you using? Are those working for you? What other systems might be available? So I do needs assessment specifically around financial tools.
Sorry, I had to bail out. I had customers.
That's good.
You're all good.
Jerica, can you like give us maybe tell us like a for instance of a small or just forming nonprofit that's come to you and how you help them?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, for example, it's pretty common that I'll get a small organization will come to me and say, "Hey, we're just starting up. We know we need to keep track of our finances. What do we do?" And I'll say, "Okay, let's get you set up with. Let's talk through what it means to track your income and expense. Let's make sure you have a dedicated bank account. Let's make sure there's somebody on staff who's looking at the money coming in and out of that bank account, and you're keeping track of what each of those things are for." Right? That there's somebody on staff who when payments go out, you have a process for being like, we'd like to spend this money. Is that okay? Yes. Let's keep notes about what money was spent. Put that into our system so we can report on it later on and say, okay, we spent this much on supplies, we spent this much on staff, we earned this much in, ticket sales or whatever. And then very often I'll train folks on using whatever that system is. Very often I'll help folks talk to their boards about financial oversight and say, okay, hey, you're a new nonprofit board. What kind of questions should you be asking? What do you need to see? How do you make sure that you're financially healthy? So it's very often the same process. Everybody needs the same things. Everybody needs the same tools.
And how do you charge?
Just hourly, right? So I have a sliding scale rate based on the size of the organization, and it's just an hour of my time is an hour of my time. And if you don't call me, I don't charge you, but basically once I start working with folks, you can call me anytime. Maybe we do like a setup project together, and then in 2 years you call and you say, hey, I think we've outgrown the system that we have. Can you help us? It's very common. Or just, hey, I have a question about the right way to do this one thing. It takes 5 minutes. That's all it is. It's very important to me to do the best that I can to pass on the knowledge that I have, because I don't think that it is fair, the expectations that are put on nonprofits to do all this really, really complicated financial work when they're just trying to do something amazing in the world. That's just it's not fair to ask people to do that. So I'm always trying as much as I can to share that knowledge that makes it feel easier to do that.
Yeah,
Well, it's super appreciative.
Yes, yeah, this is really, really informative, and I think if you're able to include your contact info and any other info
Sure.
that someone needs to be able to make an assessment if they can reach out
Absolutely.
to you, that'd be good.
Definitely. Please reach out to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I really
Please,
think-
yeah.
I really think that the treasurer for our organization, Joanna 23, who's one of the major founders, she's going to really enjoy this workshop when she watches it back, and
Great.
she's going to want to contact you. I can almost
Great.
guarantee it.
Great. What I'll do is I'll put my email address on the bottom of the last slide and just say, shoot me an email anytime.
Cool.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much. It's
Yeah,
I'm
thanks so much.
it's
Thanks so much.
really it's an honor to be with the work you're doing. Truly.
Right on, Jerica. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, really appreciate it. This is great.
Chris, thank you for organizing and for inviting me.
Yeah, heck yeah. I'll just do some final wrap up step here. So if you gotta
Great.
jet the
No,
bio-
I'm happy to stay.
So yeah, thank you everyone for coming. This is going to be recorded, and as long as Jerica is okay with it, we can make it so it's shareable. So if you have
Please share.
other folks in your organization or other nonprofits that you know of that you think would benefit from this information, we want to get it to them. It's in all of our best interests that we have a bunch of nonprofits doing a bunch of really good things. If we think about back in the heyday of Superior, you start listing out all the nonprofits and groups that were doing stuff. It was a huge ecosystem of people, all kinds of groups doing stuff. And that's what we need for our town and our region to thrive. And so it's all our best interests that we get the information and the help that we need. That's why we're doing this technical assistance to nonprofits. Is it helps systemically, it helps our whole area. And at the same time, you guys should know that there's some other efforts that we have going on at the same time. So we're also doing technical assistance for small businesses or local businesses here in town. It's another thing that we're doing. And then also we're working on turning our community center here into what's called a resilience hub. Same thing with Lob over in Miami, and then also in Kearney as well, to create a network of these resilience hubs. So when we have major disruptions, we have places that can be anchors in the community for us to be able to get the resources that we need. One of the things that's been part of that is we partnered with the Superior Fire Department to start a fire corps. And so it's all volunteer based, and there's a lot of things that are going to be coming that you'll learn about for that. But we're excited about it, and we just want to let people know that that's something that's going to start to come so we can make our town stronger. And we have open mic night first Wednesday of the month. So we got some people. If anyone here is a musician and wants to come, please do. And Lob, when's your open mic night?
Our open mic night is monthly on the second Saturday. It starts around 6.
There you go. So we got stuff to do. So yeah, again,
That
appreciate.
happens at Miami Artworks, Miami Artworks, Miami.
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, appreciate it. Thank you all so much, and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah.
Great to meet you all.
Gracias.
Take good care.
Thanks, Jerica. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody else.
Peace out.